Sounded so ominous.
Okay,
Now we're
good
back.
morning, everyone. This is the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. I'm here at a joint hearing with our counterparts in the Senate.
And many of us are members of the Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs Committee. And this is our first joint hearing and it's terrific. It makes lots of sense to do today's special presentation together because we share jurisdictions on economic development and small business, the pillar of our economy in Vermont.
So for everyone out there, this is January 29th, 2025, and it's 9 a.m. in the morning. And so I thank Chair Clarkson and our counterparts in the Senate for joining us this morning to hear about small businesses, how they're doing in the state, difficulties that they're having, things that we might be able to do to assist them, and how they can assist us in bringing more revenue into the state.
And maybe we'll begin by introducing ourselves because we have a lot of people joining us in the room and on YouTube. So maybe we should begin by introducing ourselves. You want to, I'm Allison Clarkson I represent the Windsor District and I'm chair of Senate Economic Development.
Okay, and I'm Mike Marcotte. I'm from Coventry. I represent Coventry, Irisburg, Newport Town, Troy, Jay, Westfield, Lowell, and Eden. And I'm chair of House Commerce and Economic Development.
Edie Granning, representing Jericho and Underhill, and the vice chair of the House Commerce and Economic Development Committee.
I'm Kirk White. I represent Bethel, Rochester, Stockbridge, and Hancock, and I'm the ranking member of the House Commerce Committee.
Emily Karras Duncan, representing Wilmington, Whitingham, and Halifax.
Michael Booton, Berry City. Herb Olson, representing Bristol, Lincoln, Moncton, Starksboro.
Tony Mickless, representing Milton and a little bit of Georgia.
Abby Duke. I represent parts of the old and new North Ends of Burlington.
Representative Monique Priestley, representing Bradford Fairleigh, West Fairleigh.
Tom Chittenden. I'm over in the Senate and I also serve on Senate Finance.
Good morning, Dave Weeks, serving Rutland County.
And sadly, we've had one mishap on the way in. So Randy Brock won't be joining us today. Sadly, he had a challenge, a car challenge. We hope he's okay. And that's the best news.
I have one more member from the House.
Just
Delighted to be here. Jonathan Cooper, representing Bennington 1.
And we're expecting Keisha Rum Hinsdale, who should be here soon.
Okay, so I think one Linda, Wei, and former senator. Andy will let you all kick it off. And I just ask in this first section that they're presenting that we just hold our questions. Let them present. I think it'll help move things along a lot quicker. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Marcotte and Chair Clarkson. Very excited to be here. For the record, Ellen Kaler, Executive Director of the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund.
Good morning, Linda Rossi, the State Director of Vermont Small Business Development Center.
Good morning, Andy Julo, President of the Regional Development Corporations of Vermont.
Morning, Wei Wang, she, her pronouns, Executive Director of the Vermont Professionals of Color Network.
And I also just want to acknowledge we have a large number of folks who are also here. Would you like them to introduce themselves?
Just quickly, I think it would be helpful for us.
Right.
Where do you want to start? You start.
Sorry, yeah, my name is Fiafo Zeki. I represent Vermont Womenpreneurs.
I'm Dr. Maya Carlette. I'm a small business owner here in Montpelier.
Hello, Adam Grimold, Executive Director of Brattleboro Development Critical.
It's Steinmetz, co-owner of Steinmetz.
Brian Steinmetz, other co-owners.
Oh, great.
Patrick Boyle, the CEO of VMAC, Vermont Manufacturing Extension Center.
I'm Melissa Banty, Executive Director of Central Vermont Economic Development Corporation.
Nicole Kaloran, I'm the Director of the Vermont Small Business Law Center.
Hazel Brewster, Legislative Liaison for the Agency of Commerce and Community Development.
Marcus Allen, I'm an intern for Maidstone Public Relations, and I'm the Field Director for Flavor Hub States Vermont.
Kelly Notterman, I'm the Communications Director for Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund.
Aldrich. I'm a small business owner.
Charlie Uniger with SBDC, advisor for Washington Memorial and craft beverage specialist for the state.
Ooh. And he's providing the break beverages.
Great. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get underway. The slide deck for today, to view House members, it is on your web page, I believe. Anna guys put it on, great. And if anybody's live streaming, it is available on both committees' web pages so that you can follow along if you'd like to. We did include speaker notes in the PDF. So if you want to go back and read through things in more detail, given our limited time this morning, I know 3 hours seems really spacious, but we really want to be able to cover a lot of ground and also make sure that we have plenty of time for our 4 panelists, business owner panelists, and we also want to make sure we have plenty of time for discussion at the very end. So what we're proposing to spend the next 3 hours on with all of you is that we'll cover a little bit of the purpose of what we're trying to accomplish here today. We have a few short presentations on the small business sector and some what we hope will be helpful visuals and approaches, diagrams to make sense of small business needs in our state. Then we'll have some clarifying questions. So that'll be a good time. If there's anything you want to just clarify on the first 2 presentations, that'll be a good time for your questions. And then we'll go into the first of 2 business stories, focusing on the startup and solopreneur and the early and growth stages of business development. We have 2 fabulous business owners for that. We'll take a 15-minute break, come back and have 2 additional business owners talk about more of the mature and succession stage of their businesses. And then we'll open it up for question and discussion. And hopefully through that, there might be some ideas for policy, for funding, for however it is that you all want to advance more support for the small business community. We're good with that? Any questions on what we're going to launch into here? Okay. So why are we doing this joint session? We wanted to be able to provide a high-level snapshot of the small business sector in Vermont. It is by no means comprehensive. And when we are talking today about small businesses, we are talking about those businesses that have less than 20 employees. We believe it's an area of discussion that doesn't get enough attention in our state. It is under-resourced in many ways. And so we wanted to really call attention to this today. We also want to review some approaches and tools for understanding the small business life cycle and needs that occur at different stages of development, right? Because just like a human being, we all go through different stages of development as a business and we have different needs. We're going to hear from 4 entrepreneurs on their day-to-day realities and challenges that they face as business owners at these different stages of development. We're hoping that they really are able to share that story from like, this is what was burning for me. These were the challenges I faced when I was at this stage. But then at this next stage, this is what was going on for me, right? So that's the nature of what we're going to be covering. And then we want to consider some gaps in the support system and areas of where public policy and funding might be helpful to the small business community in the state. So we'll jump into the presentation on the snapshot of the small business sector. So I think the big high-level takeaway is an order of magnitude that's important to see in this slide. Across the private sector, across all firms in Vermont, almost 93% of all firms have less than 20 employees. That represents 30.5% of all employment and 31.9% of all wages. Conversely, 1.1% of all firms have more than 100 employees, representing 42.6% of employment and 43.8% of wages. You can see that, so one way to think about this is we have a lot of small businesses that are solopreneurs, people that are in business for themselves. Some of them want to move on to adding employment. But if we really want to help businesses that are interested in expanding here and increasing employment, there are different needs that they have to get to 20 to 99 workers and then above 100 workers. And that's some of the things we're going to be exploring with you today. So overall, just to put a finer point on this, there are over 29,000 private sector firms. They are registered with the Secretary of State. They are businesses in the state of Vermont. They employ over 250,000 Vermonters, and they account for $4.1 billion in wages. Of those, 27,204, that's that 93%, have less than 20 employees. But importantly, 21,687 have 0 to 4 employees. So we're talking really, really micro, right? So their needs are going to be different than firms that are larger. Those firms, that 27,204 firms represent 77,364 people and $1.3 billion in wages. Just along that continuum of size, 1,758 firms have 20 to 49 employees, over 68,000 people employed, and 985 million in wages. And then of the largest in Vermont, we only have 331. And just to note that by the U.S. Small Business Administration definition, small business is 500 employees or less. So almost all of our employers are considered small by federal standards, but in Vermont, we think about it in terms of more than 100 employees. And they employ over 107,000 people in Vermont and 1.8 billion in wages. It just gives you a snapshot of the scope across different scales of businesses. Now, this may be a little bit hard to read fully, but you can look at it in more detail later. This are the 9 what's called super sectors. The U.S. Department of Labor has NACE codes for all the different jobs in the state, in the country, and they categorize things by super sector. So accommodation and food service, construction, education, all of those. So the takeaway from this slide is that across all super sectors and their subsectors, the less than 20 employees is the predominant size business. So it's not like there's an anomaly on that 93% concentrated in a couple of super sectors. It is across all super sectors. Okay.
So we're looking at this slide. So this is data from the US SBA, and it's really taking data from the 2021 time period, but it's helpful to understand the demographic breakdown of small business ownership and employment across the state. So the smaller map shows the share of employees working at small businesses across the state. You can see most of it is concentrated in the eastern part of the state. And then as we look at business ownership by demographic, women own about 43% of all businesses. Veterans own 5.8% of businesses. Hispanic Latino own 1.4%, and other racial minorities own 2.9%. And I just wanted to note that these numbers are generally fairly consistent, even though it is older data. So the general percentages are the same. And I wanted to also note that the racial minority segment increased from previous US SBA reports. So in the 2023 report, this is from 2024. So 2023 used 2019 data. BIPOC business owners accounted for 2.5% of business ownership. In 2021, they accounted for 2.4% of business. So we can see that increase happening.
All right. So on this slide, you can take a look, even though we're in the early stages of 2025, we think about the effects of the pandemic from 2020 really through 2022 and the residual sort of impacts to both establishments, businesses, as well as jobs. And so we all talk about this because it relates directly back to the needs of starting, growing, transitioning ownership of businesses. And so I'll just touch on the kind of looking at the graphs, what these bottom two, blocks really talk about. So the trends for establishments, pre-pandemic, pretty regular cycles, a little bit upward trend, economic stability. Post-pandemic, irregular cycles, a strong downward trend, thus economic volatility. And then on the jobs side, again, smaller swings pre-pandemic, some slight downward trend, but more stability across employment. Post-pandemic, large swings, stronger downturn trends, and employment volatility. So probably not news to anybody in this room. This is what you think about and talk about every day. But we wanted to just sort of have a visual to reflect where we are now as it results from the pandemic. And really, again, they sort of speak for themselves, but this larger swings, downward trend in general, and volatility in both economic establishment numbers and jobs and employment.
A piece of good news, though, here in Vermont, this is from the Vermont Futures Project, the 5-year business survival rate, at least in 2020, Vermont ranked second highest in the 5-year survival rate for new businesses across the country. And so to us, this indicates that the state has strong entrepreneurial ecosystem and a supportive environment for startups, at least at that time. And obviously, as Linda had noted, there is more volatility now, which it kind of goes to the importance of, in this post-pandemic environment, businesses have a new set of challenges that they're facing. And that's why business support services like ours are really more critical at this time, so that we can help strengthen and grow the business sector. I also want to note that some of this is also supported by the fact that we are a small state. There are more networking opportunities. There are more resources available. So that is the benefit of this great state that we're in.
So this, I thought, was a pretty powerful slide with just 2 graphics. We know, again, Vermont's small size, but I thought it'd be particularly important for today's conversation to just look at these 2 pie charts. So on the left, we're looking at the US. So baby boomers own 37% of all small businesses in the US, but in Vermont, 58%. So when I kind of looked at this, it caused me literally to pause and reflect on this, right? So we think about this in our work, but there's nothing like a graphic to kind of really sort of spell it out for us. Vermont, we know, has the 3rd highest median population in the US. What we all see, and again, we're sprinkling our day-to-day anecdotal experiences into our talking points, and that is we see many Vermonters wanting to retire. Some kept with their business to hold it together through the pandemic, and now it's to the point or, where they're looking to move on and retire. But we have too much supply and we have too little demand. Gen X already have some slice of the pie. Millennials, and again, these are generalizations, have little or no capacity or financial ability to take on and absorb the baby boomers' businesses as they prepare to sell them. And so often we focus, I think, in our conversations about the number of workers in larger businesses, but we know that the owners of these very small businesses need that support as they think about, what is the value of my business? Who's going to be a buyer of it? What is happening in the market? Is this a growing industry that I'm in or not? And so in order to support the creation of new business owners that can take on transitioning, that's a whole nother topic of conversation. And so, we often see sellers emerge from a competitor, resulting in a consolidation. Is there anything else to add on this? Keep going. Okay.
Yeah. Good. All right. So a little slight shift here in focus. That was very data oriented. We just passed through, and now we're going to share a little bit about some ways to make sense of all of this and the needs that small businesses have over time as they evolve. So one of the things that I think is very helpful is to think about the structure of and the nature of small business development in the stage of development of that enterprise, in the scale and type of operation, and in the market channels that they sell into. And the point of this being a triangle, 3-legged triangle that is equal, you remember your geometry, is that it's important for these things to be in balance. So for instance, if you are an early stage or new and beginning enterprise, and you are very hyper or micro scale or small scale, even if it's a value-added product, you're likely not to be able to get your product into Whole Foods in a regional chain, right? Like that just makes sense. So the point here is that as businesses develop, the service provider community that supports them and also just business owners having this awareness, it can be very helpful to really think about where your business is at in the life cycle of your business and have realistic expectations about how much you can produce given how you're funded and your number of workers and your throughput of whatever products and services are, and then what is required by those market channels. This detail here is for the food system. We use it a lot in talking about the food system. And in the market channels, you'll see some different types, things broken down, because depending on the type of market you're selling into, the rules of those markets are different. So for instance, if you're selling into directly to consumers, like through a farmer's market or CSA, you're producing what you want to produce and, with some sense of what your customers want, but you can kind of set your price based on what you know and your cost of production is. Whereas if you're somebody that's trying to get into a regional or a national scale market, you are a price taker. You're going to be able to sell in based on what that very large consolidated chain often is willing to pay for those products. And then you're going to have to pay slotting fees. You're going to have to pay for anything that might be discounted. You're going to, in some cases in Vermont, you're actually doing stocking of shelves yourself, right? So understanding the landscape that you're selling into and the rules of that is really important for a lot of business owners. And what we have found over the years is that is often not known. It is behind a curtain in terms of the rules of the marketplace. And so part of our collective work is to try to make that more visible so that business owners have more understanding of the rules of the game so they can adjust accordingly. They can think about their business models differently. Now, inside the triangle are some of the key systems related to infrastructure and equipment, workforce, capital, marketing and sales, operations, your internal financial systems. Those two have to be in balance with your stage, your scale, and your market. So for instance, if you're a solopreneur just starting out, you don't have to really think about workforce. But once you start getting more products into the marketplace, you start realizing like, oh, wow, I can't produce and do all of this myself. I need to bring on some workers. Well, now you've got to start thinking about your HR systems. You got to understand employment law. You have to understand payroll taxes. You have to get set up in those systems. Like there's just things that occur at different stages of development as a business owner that you have to pay attention to. And again, what we find consistently is that many business owners are not fully aware of all of the things that they need to be paying attention to. So as I mentioned, over time, businesses go through different life cycles, just like we human beings do. You need different things at different times for your business. The basic way that businesses evolve over time is kind of like these S curves. Right? You start up, you're in growth mode because you're getting your products or your services to market. You're doing fine. You're like getting it out there. And then at some point, both you're not being able to meet the demand of the marketplace. Your internal systems that you had in place that worked fine when you're at 5 employees don't really work anymore when you're at 15 employees. You need to make changes. And so what we find with a lot of businesses is they get to these inflection points in their business development over time. And if they are not aware of them, they could actually fall into decline. But if they're working with business coach or with a service provider, like many that are in the room and or they know about these cycles, then they can use that as an opportunity to pivot, to refresh their internal systems, to think about what do they want to do next. Do they really want to grow to be $1 million company, or do they really going to be okay with being a $500,000 company, for instance? These are important inflection points that businesses just naturally go through, and it can be really difficult to go through it if you're feeling like you're doing it all by yourself and it's all on just your shoulders. So this grid, you have handouts, so this will be a little easier maybe to see in that. And I'm not going to go with this in detail. It's a little more complicated to talk through. But the main point here is if you take a look at this left column here, what's along in the blue boxes are all the types of things that businesses need to pay attention to: research, technology and infrastructure, financing, technical and business assistance, the networks that you're in, the workforce development, your pipeline of potential workers. What's the next key hire you need to make? Sales and distribution channels and challenges, education and outreach, and then public policy, paying attention to the regulatory framework that is out there that you operate in. And so the point of this is simply to say, as a business owner, these are all the types of things you need to pay attention to, and not just once, but all the time, right? And depending on where you are in a supply chain, from inputs, production, processing, distribution, or the end user, what you need in terms to be paying attention to may also be different. The kind of technology or equipment that you need as a producer of products versus a distributor of products is going to be different, right? So think about, that's what individual businesses need to pay attention to. Now go up in elevation to think about an entire industry. Those of us who work at trying to advance an entire, like the food system or the forest products industry or the aerospace industry in the state or advanced manufacturing in the state, we pay attention to everything along the left edge, but for the entire industry. How is the research and development coming along for the aerospace industry in this state, right? Is there, is the University of Vermont able to meet some of those R&D needs that to can't fund for itself, for instance? On the financing side, you're thinking about, are there all forms of capital to meet the needs of businesses at every stage of their development? Is the business assistance and technical assistance community right-sized for the level of need, higher industry? Okay, so I think from a public policy standpoint, that last row there, it's like, do we have the right regulations that match a business's stage of development? Or are we doing these one-size-fits-all public policy approaches? And we would argue, don't do that. Businesses need different things at different times. And so thinking about that intentionally when you're looking at public policy, I think we feel is really important. And you can replace that top supply chain with stages of business development too. If you find this framework useful, just as a touch point for like, oh yeah, where are we in this cycle of things? So one of those rows was around capital and financing. And so we've developed what's known as the capital continuum. It's been around for a good 15 years that we've been circulating this basic concept. There in your packet is a copy of the continuum. And on the back side of that is a description of what all of the different forms of capital are. So it's a really good resource document for you to spend some time with if you're interested. And what this basically shows is that there's a continuum around risk and reward. So things like highest risk, but also potentially highest reward is on the right-hand side there, like for instance, grants. So when we think about the BGAP grants, or the Working Lands Enterprise Fund grants, or any federal grants that might be available, they are really, really critical, especially for those industries that tend to be more low margin, meaning it's really hard to make a lot of money in a particular industry like food, like forest, as opposed to say maybe aerospace or advanced manufacturing. So grants are really important because they can function like equity, right? A lot of times, well, all the time, if you're going to get a bank loan, which is on the other side on debt, what you're going to have to, there's have to be collateral, right? And there's going to have to be something tangible so that if you fail, the bank can get their money back, or at least a portion of it. So if you're a business that doesn't have a lot of built up internal equity, retained earnings, or you don't have a lot of cash available to fuel your growth, if you don't have the ability to take on more debt, because you don't have a loan to value ratio that banks or VITA will accept, then grants can serve the function of equity, of owner equity. So that's a very important part. They also can be used to try out new things, pilot projects, testing new business approaches, those kinds of things. And then in between, you've got a whole range from sub-debt. So subordinated debt are people that take a position below the main lender. So they get paid second or third or fourth, depending on what position they're in. You have royalty financing, which is a form of capital. The flexible capital fund is an example of that here in Vermont. And that's where a percentage of your revenue goes towards repaying the debt that you've received in the project cost. Convertible debt is something where it functions like equity. Like, let's say for 5 years, you don't have any principal or interest repayment, but that after 5 years, you're going to start paying principal and interest on some kind of a schedule, more like traditional debt. So what that does is it helps provide working capital in those early years. Because one of the things that's the hardest, and you'll hear this, I think, from our panelists and from other presenters, is that one of the hardest things to get is working capital because it's unsecured, right? You can't go to a bank and say, hey, I'm going to be expanding by $100,000 in sales this coming year. I can't take on any more debt, but I want you to give me some working capital because I need a whole bunch of inputs in order to be able to make more products to get out to the market so that I can make those sales. Right. So that working capital, if you don't already have it in retained earnings, is really hard to come by. And that's where the royalty financing, convertible debt and equity and VC money can be that match of capital. The one final thing I'll say on this is that as companies progress over time and get later stage development, it is most often the case that one single source of capital will not fund a project, will not fund an expansion. It's called a stacking of capital. So you need to have multiple stacks of capital in order to get a project to completion, which means we need all types of capital across the entire continuum, right? It's not like one is better than the other. They all have different functions. They all serve different purposes at different times and in different ways. So it's really important from a policy and a state planning perspective to keep an eye on how's the financing community doing? Do they have enough resources to meet the expansion needs of the businesses in our sectors? And then another continuum, and we're switching gears pretty quickly here, but another continuum is that we think about a lot is the business assistance continuum. And you have a printout, so it's a little easier to see up top. What we've done is, and we may have missed some people. So if anybody finds that they're missing on this, let me know and we will add you. It's not intentional. Is that we listed who the service providers are in the state who have really the right types of business assistance and technical assistance, depending on the stage of development of that business. And so they offer different things in different forms. Some of it's webinars, some of it's one-on-one coaching, some of it's cohorts of business owners together, workshops. There's any number of ways in which that service delivery is provided. And what's really important, again, just like capital, we need all forms of capital. We need the ecosystem of the business and technical assistance provider community to be strong and complete so that we can show up and support businesses at all the different stages, depending on what our expertise is in terms of those stages. And if we can't, then it's having somebody to hand off somebody to, like refer someone to support them. The other thing that's important to know is that there's different types of business assistance, as I mentioned, along this types of assistance. I mentioned a few of them. And then there's also some interesting infrastructure support services that have been evolving. So accelerators and incubators, for instance, for businesses, co-working spaces have been showing up all across our state. Those are also important pieces of hard infrastructure that supports the soft infrastructure that is the business assistance world. Okay, so with that, I know from coming before various committees, as many of us do, that a key question is always, who does what for whom? And how do you measure success and making sure that there isn't duplication in what gets funded, right? So that's on all of us to make sure that we leverage and understand what each other does
for an industry, for a stage, how we do it. Like Ellen said, is it training? Is it webinars? Is it one-on-one? What does it look like? And so this graph on this slide is really just to highlight an example of a one-time pilot program, really for 2 years, 2022 and 2023, under the last federal administration, and it was launched by the U.S. Small Business Administration nationwide. Vermont was able to get one of those awards called the Community Navigator Pilot Program, and it had a hub and spoke framework to it. So the Vermont SBDC acted as the hub and project management for the program, and we had 9 statewide spoke organizations. And what that allowed us to do with the funding and the personnel was more intentionality around serving particularly the group that we were just talking about, 0 to 4, under 10, and looking at what their needs were and really cross-communicating all the time about, you know, how are we responding to those needs? So quicker referrals to one another. And so while that still exists loosely because Vermont is small and we all care and we know each other, the funding has been exhausted and is no longer available. And so there's some interesting learning that came out of that that I think is just noteworthy for this conversation about the cohesiveness of the network, what we learned, what are the gaps, and what is sort of not able to be continued because of that funding going away. Okay, so moving along. So, you know, we talked about in Ellen's earlier discussion around stages and how the needs sort of match up at different stages of development. This slide about needs is really to complement that conversation from the standpoint of we all track data on who comes to us for services, for education, for coaching, for advising. And so this is a complement to that earlier slide that really says, these are the needs based on what people, Vermonters, are coming to us for assistance and support with. So we have it broken down by stage. And again, it's one slide, so it cannot be an exhaustive list, but it's generalized. So in the early pre-venture and startup, you'll see a lot of pieces around, is there a business in my good idea, right? Feasibility, market research, entity formation. And this is where we incorporated our other partners in the legal small business law center because they're seeing a lot of the legal elements by stage as well. So access to capital, financial projections, that's often key to accessing the capital. What do I need? Where am I going to get it? And what am I using it for? So those supports to sort of help guide you through that. We'll move on to growth stage. And this is, you know, really expanding of customers, pricing, cost of goods and labor, really understanding what is my mission and vision and where do I fit in this marketplace? So I had a vision when I started, but as we grow, it's going to be important to clarify it. This is to Ellen's point, hiring and managing employees, business trends, customer base, again, different kinds of access to capital. And this is where some of the legal needs that we are seeing are around employment, capital, protecting intellectual property if you're in that business, and other liability issues on the legal front. The mature businesses, and again, this can be a broad range, right? So improving operations to build value in the business. So way ahead of thinking about transitioning it and selling it, building value in it, creating those standard operating procedures. So in a way that owner becomes less relevant before you think about transitioning. So processes and controls, a lot of discussion around strategic planning post-pandemic, almost like go back to, you know, think like a startup. It's a new world out there. So external threats, we've all seen pandemic, 2 years of back-to-back floods that have hit many communities in Vermont. And that has caused our business owners to think, gosh, what is that next thing that's going to hit me? You know, if it's not a pandemic or a flood, what about a cyber hack? What about, and so you'll see some examples of the ways that the service provider network is trying to help be there, meet people where they are, and have tools and resources for these stages. And so the legal concerns have been directly related to that flood piece, which is landlord, tenant, commercial leases, data privacy, contracts. And then again, buying and selling. What is the value of my business? Many owners think this is my retirement plan financially. This is what I've put my whole life into. And it's really hard to separate the person from the business. So valuation, industry research, the goals, right? Personal goals, business goals may be very different. Explore those exit pathways. That exit can go to an employee, employees collectively, an outsider, a family member, and we see all of those different examples. And so the buyer is going to need access to capital, which is just what we talked about. And again, on the legal side, mergers, acquisitions, asset deals, bankruptcy, liquidation. So this is a little bit of a snapshot. I know, Wei, you have a few things to add.
Yeah, and so from the BIPOC business community perspective, in 2022, VTPOC with Main Street Alliance under the CMPP project, we conducted a survey and listening sessions. And one of the key things, and I really want to emphasize the needs for a small business, is the access to capital, and why it's really important for the BIPOC community that we continue to talk about. It's really that idea of having what Linda has already touched on, having those savings to draw from, having, any kind of savings, whether it's from family or personal savings. These BIPOC owners, especially if you're coming from an immigrant refugee community, you're coming to this country with nothing, right? And so what are you actually drawing from? You're trying to create a business to move ahead in life. And you couple that with the lack of collateral that we've already touched on as well, and other types of assets. And on top of that, you'll see in this graphic here from national data, we don't have it for Vermont, unfortunately, BIPOC young adults who are ready to start or buy a business, their credit score is 100 points less than their white counterparts. So their ability to access loans is going to be that much less in comparison. So, but what we also found in the survey is BIPOC businesses want to be in Vermont. They want to do business here. Their values match Vermont values. It's a great place to be. There is availability of resources that they might not be able to find elsewhere. That said, a lot of people are still trying to navigate what existing resources there are. Being someone who is visibly different, sometimes it's harder to access. I think some of you have already heard me talk about the fact that when you're moving into a rural community and you look different, you're obviously standing out, and you go into the bank, you didn't go to school with that lender or, someone who's working at the town hall office. So it makes it that much more challenging to access those community capitals as well.
Great. So just another really quick example. If you're interested, you're able to do a little QR code and take a look at some of the resources that we put together during the CMPP time. Also was funded by Vermont Housing Conservation Board. We have a business coaching program at the Sustainable Jobs Fund, and we have about 10 different business coaches that are C-suite executives that have been there, done that, and they're giving back to the clients that we work with. And they really wanted to write down some of the core things that they just find is so key for being in business. And so we published 6 modules. There's 36 documents. It's all free and online. And the financial literacy module, we actually had, with the support of the CMPP program, we're able to translate it into 6 languages during that time. So that's also free and available online. So feel free to check that out.
All right. So just again, another quick example. Wei, would you mind showing it? Yeah.
Yes.
So again, this is just a quick example of reacting to the times that we find ourselves in. And that is a sense that in the businesses that we work with at Vermont SBDC, many more struggling to sort of say, well, where am I and where am I going, and worrying about those external threats. And we thought, well, again, control the controllables. what can we do to help support, motivate, and empower the things that a business owner has control over? So it's really retrenching back into the core business fundamentals, strengthening those to make the business as strong as it can be, to be prepared, to be resilient. And so this is available online. I have a couple hundred printed copies. It is available for people to do it themselves and download. There's assessments and worksheets, or you can engage one of the service providers to have an accountability partner to guide you through it.
On to me, all right. So the RDCs have been involved in technical assistance traditionally for a long time. Traditionally, that's been beyond this stage. When businesses are beyond 20 employees, they're going probably from what we would call small to medium, scaling that for Vermont. Starting with this program in COVID, we got to be involved in 3 successive programs. The Community Navigator Pilot Program was one that offered technical assistance at an earlier stage. And what we found is there's a real technical assistance gap. Once your business is through, you've got your business plan, your finance, your tax structure, you're up and running, it becomes very lonely. Your technical assistance needs do not go away. They actually become more specified to the industry that you're in. And it can be very difficult to either afford or locate those services. I heard a statistic yesterday, and I think I'll get it right. We have 72 people per square mile in the state of Vermont. In New Jersey, they have 1,200 people. Wow. You think in terms of the natural networks as a small business owner trying to naturally network, it's much more difficult in Vermont. And if you're operating a technical business, in Caledonia County, trying to reach that person on the other side of the state becomes extremely challenging. Paid search. I mean, if anybody's ever run a small business that's vendor-based, we're all getting obliterated by paid search by these larger companies that are trying to reach Vermont businesses. And as the Vermont business, when you reach out to them, they're not interested in you anyway because you're so small. So these really filled that gap. What we did is we ran a vendor database. So vendors would sign up. I'm an architect. I specialize in efficient use of small retail spaces. We'd have that directory. We'd open up applications. Businesses who have technical needs would apply. When most businesses that have gotten to this place, they know exactly what they need. They just need some help getting connected with that resource. We would have navigators that would work with those businesses and those vendors to connect them and guide them through that project. And it's a small grant. It's about $3,500 per grant. Not a lot of money, but what we found is that professional relationship tends to continue. Once they've found each other, that's probably the most valuable thing and continues to grow after that.
Great. So what are the trends that we are seeing in the small business community? We're going to go through a list. I am mindful of time. So for solopreneurs, some of the things that we're seeing: high cost of entry, how to start, having difficulty starting a business at a small scale, challenges to satisfy customers who want customized services, and needing different ways to pay. For startups, a higher cost of borrowing. So interest rates have been really high. It's been really challenging. Lack of capital, and you'll hear some of the folks later on talk about lack of capital available for startups in terms of loans, and we've also mentioned it here. And a longer runway needed in order to get started. Sometimes they don't have awareness of compliance issues. Ellen has already touched on that. For growth, the cost of living has really gone up. And so a lot of we're seeing folks going back to 9-to-5s or having to take additional jobs in order to continue their business. For buying and selling, there are demographic challenges. Like we've already touched on, Vermont is the 3rd highest median age state in the US. So many businesses for sale and yet not enough people to actually purchase because of that generation issue. And for mature businesses carrying higher debt from the pandemic, access to capital is still a thing. It's continuously happening over the life of a business, exacerbated by the pandemic. I also wanted to note that the impact of high healthcare costs is also significantly impacting businesses. We have a healthcare business here today, and they'll talk about how it's impacting their business as well. So wanted to make sure that you all were aware of these trends and just how important our work here is, being able to help people navigate through these challenges over the life cycle through each of these challenges. So
So we've got about 8 minutes for some clarifying questions before we have our first panel. Business owners. So anything from the data, any reflections, just like what you saw, any questions to clarify? Yeah.
I'm just curious. So, having run like 110 businesses through the space on Main, accelerator, like the biggest thing that I keep seeing people return over and over and over again is they are starting out, they want to find like a spot to rent, but people who are like buying the properties in town that are vacant are left with like, maybe they have, in one case, 24,000 square feet. That owner like doesn't have the money to upfit basically smaller spaces for all of the individual entrepreneurs. And they don't have access to grants as a for-profit entity. And then, so they need to cover the cost somehow. So in like a lot of cases, I'm helping people just like the entrepreneurs negotiate with the business owner to try to figure out how to get money to like upfit, because they don't have the money either to upfit the spot. But so we're like stuck where nobody can afford to basically, upfit the spaces. And they're just sitting vacant on Main Street. And that's happening in all of my towns.
That's a great additional trend to add.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I'm like that's happening to a business owner that we're supporting as well, where she took on a space that was too big for her.
Exactly.
And so now she went out of business, but still has a lease contract and she's in debt $32,000 and she has no way to make that money back.
Yeah.
So how is she dealing with the space? We're trying to come up with different solutions. So that is definitely a trend that we're seeing. If they're even able to get this.
Yeah.
So other clarifying questions? Yeah.
One of the slides I think that gave us all pause was looking at the share of businesses owned by boomers, millennials, etc. But since we're in an older state, what quote should that be if it was, how much smaller, how over are we based on our ages, and where do people turn to for business transition?
Well, I mean, if you look at the US at 37 and then Vermont at 58%, I think that is consuming. I know, again, anecdotally from our work, looking at, what people are coming for assistance with, there's an increased number of requests from people trying to sell their businesses. And the amount of time that it takes to go through evaluation, what are you selling, all of that process, it's not only lengthy, but it takes enormous amounts of time for which I don't think there's a service provider here at this table or represented elsewhere that has enough time to meet the demand of the people that are seeking guidance as they are trying to quickly get their business sold or thinking about it more long-term. It's definitely presenting an impact to all of us as service providers. And we're trying to coordinate with one another just to see who's doing what. We're having roundtables about that topic alone so that we can meet the needs with what we have for existing capacity.
Yeah, the Vermont Employee Ownership Center, for instance, is available to work with those business owners that are exploring like an ESOP or a worker-owned acquisition of that firm, but that's not for everybody. So there are individual service provider or businesses actually that do the business evaluation and will help to find a buyer. But again, that can take a lot of time. And you need the money to be able to buy out that business owner. If you're thinking about you're selling that and that's your retirement, you may not be open to, being paid off over 10 years. You might want all of it right now. Right. And so these kinds of questions are so important to address at the beginning of being a business owner, is to actually think, what's your exit strategy? What do you want to build towards so that you're actually prepared? And then you start 5 years in advance is the ideal. Before you actually want to get out, you got to start.
And a lot of businesses are trying to get out within that 5-year mark. Right. And so there's so much that they haven't done. And so like we're supporting a business owner right now where they are trying to buy out a business and there aren't loans available because of just various issues that we've already addressed here. And you can't use the equipment within the existing business as collateral, right? So there's so many challenges. So really having that runway to make sure that these businesses can transition in a healthy way is important.
Yes, Senator.
I'm curious what the correlation is between size and wages, something you haven't touched on. And are you going to be touching on that later in the presentation?
Thank you for that. I will say that, part of this is what kind of a margin business is it? If you are a 3-person graphic design firm with a lot of larger business clients, you probably can afford good wages and benefits to your employees, right? If you are a smaller, value-added food producer, like with low margin business, you're likely not to be able to pay the competitive wages and benefits or any benefits. One of the things that is a challenge for business owners in this less than 20 employee range is that they often don't yet have an HR director equivalent. Sometimes it's the business owner that's making these, doing all of the paperwork for new employees and things. So the challenge with that is that if you're not actually working on your business to improve profitability and think intentionally about being over time, being able to pay better wages and better benefits offered, for instance, they have sort of a compensation philosophy, so to speak, so that you're planning for that. Then oftentimes as the business owner, because you're so busy just working in the business, you're not necessarily paying attention to the wages and benefits of your employees. Not like in a malicious way, like it's just like overwhelming, it's too much. And so what that can do, big picture, is it can hold back wages and benefits. Holding back wages and benefits means less income in the pockets of their workers. And in many cases, there are full-time workers who still qualify for public assistance. So if you think about that from that perspective, we talk a lot about the affordability of Vermont and the need to bring down costs. Well, affordability is also an equation. It's a mathematical equation. The other side of the equation is income. So as we think about how do we bring down costs for individuals, for businesses, and for employees and workers and community members, we also need to think about what are the tools that we have available that we can support this amazing and very large community of small business owners to be more profitable so that they can then pay better wages and benefits.
Can I also make an additional point? We also have to note that a lot of business owners are not paying themselves, right, even if they do have employees. So that's a huge problem.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a really important.
Yeah, and it actually it ties into our knowing that across all sectors, Vermont underpays. And it makes sense given the number of when you look at the number of small businesses in this state and you make that correlation, it makes it illustrates why.
One more question and then go ahead, sir.
Thank you. So this is good foundation material and I appreciate you guys coming together. And I realize we're only 1/3 of the way through the briefing, but I'm wondering if in the next 2/3 you're going to have your ask, in particular in relation to regulation, legislation, et cetera.
We will have probably some vague things that will arise, but we intentionally did not want to come here with a pitch. We really wanted to come here to lay that foundation. So I'm glad that's meeting that mark. I think what you'll hear as we go along, there may be some things that arise, but that last section of our conversation is also for you all to be contemplating, like, what did you hear and what is arising for you that might be some things that you could do to support and help. Yep.
Yeah. Well, you've already identified 3 areas that we intersect very significantly with. It is technical assistance, workforce development, and public policy.
Yes.
So 3 areas that we can actually have impact on.
And funding.
Yeah.
All right.
Emily had one.
Okay, sure. Sorry.
Yeah. Of the 27,000 businesses that are 0 to 19 employees, what's the uptake of services that you all provide? Is there a sense of if there is any like major service gap, or are people finding the support and finding their way to you?
You're overwhelmed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. There is not enough service providers in the state. It's just not.
Yeah.
And on so many levels. And I will say, though, on the flip side of that is a lot of business owners, especially here in Vermont, where we are like rugged individualists, don't realize that it's okay to ask for help.
Yeah.
Along the way. And so a lot of business owners just go it alone. and they miss out on the kind of supports that they could get.
Yeah.
So you are currently overwhelmed with service, and then there still is a pool of people waiting in the wings that are gonna need service.
It's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Hence all of the wonderful people out here in the gallery as testament. So, all right, I think we need to transition to our panel. So Linda and Rayway, you wanna the beer or more?
And while we're doing that, I just want to recognize that Secretary Curley has joined us from
Hello.
some community development. Thank you for joining
Well,
us.
the transition is I've been listening all morning and as you can tell, we have amazing coaches. And what I do want to just acknowledge is that everyone that spoke this morning is in the governor's recommend. We support all of them, the work they're doing, and they do yeoman's work. They're not lying. We're incredibly grateful to have their partnership because they do touch all of our small businesses in so many ways. And so we just, want to express our gratitude. And thank you for doing this morning. It's an incredible way to share what you do for everybody around the state. So thank you.
Okay, so our panelists, so we have, if you want to come up and you go on.
No, where are we going?
Oh, sorry. Let's come over here. Maybe we'll have the cameras on you. All right, I'm just gonna. Wait, do you want to sit here?
Yeah, I'll be over here. Sorry.
Okay.
So far away. Just a note, we have a change in speakers because Mike Ripley, who was planning to be here, is very sick. So he's not able to join us today. We do have amazing other business owners, Jada and Maya, joining Ruth. So just to start, oh my gosh. So thank you for joining us so far. So for this next section, we're really going to be focusing on business stories, hearing from business owners themselves. So for this first portion of it, we'll be focusing on startup and early business owners. So 3 individuals. Do you want to quickly introduce yourselves, your name and your business and when you got started?
My name is Jada Costa. I'm a physician, MD. We have 2 businesses right down the street from you all on 147 State Street. It's called Partners in Integrative Healing and State Street TMS. We offer primary care, community mental health and psychiatry, in addition to specialty psychiatry and specialty medical care.
And I am Maya Carlett. I am a nurse practitioner and with Jada.
I am Ruth Steinmetz. I co-own 2 businesses with my partner in life and business, Brian. One is Steinmetz PLLC, which is a real estate brokerage and interior design firm. And we're soon going to open a store that will have home goods. And the second is kind of a holdover of my past life career in marketing. And it is a public relations firm that supports small business owners and very, very small organizations.
Great, thank you. So to start, can you each tell us about what stage you're in and what your experience has been? What are some challenges?
Sure. So we decided to start our business July 2023 right here on State Street. As you know, that was not such a lucky month for us. So we did flood. We had to renovate the entire floor space of our building. So that delayed our opening by 6 months. And then, we did form 2 separate LLCs. Then in February, we had the Change Healthcare outage, which I think most of you hopefully are familiar with. And this was the largest cybersecurity attack on the healthcare system. And that essentially froze all of our money coming in for several months. We did make it through the first year. So I would say we're early stage. We are working on operationalizing, scaling and growing. And we do have employees. Our mission statement really is to not take private equity money. We intentionally want to live outside of the corporate medical world and create inclusive spaces for those who are marginalized in more traditional medical settings. So financing has certainly been an issue, and we've had to take on a lot of debt in order to get the medical equipment we need, the staffing we need. We also did not pay ourselves the entire first year in order to pay our employees and get started.
Yes, I'll focus specifically on Steinmetz. And we started in 2023, not 2003. And as well, we experienced a big shift in the market where the interest rates sharply rose. We had predicted that we were going to have a good start with the post-pandemic craze in buying, and the market looked really good for us. But we could not predict that that's how things would end up. And so there were a lot of buyers and sellers squeezed out of the market. And so we did not have a customer base that was as wide as we expected. And it was also the first time we were going in as an independent brokerage. We are not under any other brokerage. So there are extremely high costs to running your own brokerage and getting the leads that you need to be able to get the sales that you can survive on. And so it was an incredibly difficult year for us. And we were forced to start looking for part-time jobs to be able to supplement our income. And then, sorry, I'm done. Yeah, we said of the time.
Yeah, you're fine.
Yes, but we have, since the pivot, we've been able to be very nimble and resilient. And our focus is really on building our community, being folks who have been unhoused at one point in our lives with a family. We understand firsthand how difficult it is to live in this state. And we want to help our community, specifically new Americans, to be able to navigate the housing market in a way that they feel like their hand is held to their needs, their specific needs. And is very difficult to navigate financial institutions, the market. And in the housing interior sector, is not necessarily something that is considered working class to be thinking about interior design, but everyone wants a beautiful and well cared for home. And there's, environmental and climate justice considerations in that as well. So we are really taking an inclusive approach to our services, and we're looking to expand our growth by opening a brick and mortar.
And so something that you've mentioned to me before, Ruth, is being a service-based business that presents challenges, right? Can you talk more about that?
Absolutely. First thing is with financial institutions, it's very obscure to understand their underwriting process and their criteria for what makes a successful or potentially successful business. And so even with the first bank that we have, the bank that we have for our business accounts, it was very hard to convince them to even give us a line of credit. We don't have one yet. And to secure the funding we needed to get from our seed stage and to now more into our growth stage, with the lack of collateral, lack of our own funds to back the business, it's just very hard to convince funders that we are a business worth betting on. And I made another note. And now that we are looking to, as you mentioned, have a capital stack to get into our next stage of the business, it's very difficult to rally around all the funding sources and have them work in a coordinated sense to help us get the funding we need. And we are running against the clock because we have these projections and we need to be able to get the funds we need to start operationalizing our plan to meet the projections so that we can pay back the loan. And everyone is not working in concert. And then there's the whole issue of the UCC filing. Every lender wants to be first priority. And so it's just very difficult from the consumer end to be able to rally around all the funders we need and get them to give us the funding we need.
And some of the accessible loans, like you've mentioned, they're only like $50,000 or less. And so a lot of that is going into existing operations, right? I wonder if that's the same experience for you too?
Absolutely. I mean, the cost of starting a business is no small amount of money. $50,000 doesn't even begin to cover the costs as far as, you know, the marketing and the hiring and the operational internal equipment that you need to operate your business, whatever that might be. And we definitely struggled with making very difficult choices about where to put our dollars in this first year that we just went through. And there were many points when we looked at each other and thought, can we do this? For that reason and other reasons as well.
I think without going into too much of a side tangent on the current state of healthcare, because that could be a separate, you know, all day talk. Thinking about offering services as a physician, we have to think about, do we want to be in network or out of network, right?
Right.
Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont is one of the best payers that I've worked with. I've been doing this for over 20 years. I've had practices in New York. I've worked actually throughout the country. They actually came to our office in person around the Change Healthcare to help us get it sorted out and so that we could get paid and stay open. But choices like taking Medicaid right now is not sustainable for us to take as a practice. We can't afford it. Medicare is similar. They're a little bit better, but we're concerned about what's going on in the government, and they've already started doing clawbacks. And we're also aware that Medicaid has done clawbacks. They have a 5-year clawback period. Some of the local clinicians owe up to $11,000. So we as a business, if we have a 5-year trajectory that we're looking at and Medicare is saying we can come back at any time during that time and take money back, you know, how does that work? And also, you know, maybe not everyone realizes Medicare has not increased its reimbursement for physicians or clinicians in 20 years. And not only have they not increased it, they have decreased it in 2024, and they plan to decrease it again in 2025. So we have a very large elderly population in this state that we are struggling to try to offer services for.
Yeah. And that's so difficult as mission-based businesses.
Yes.
Both businesses are mission-based. And so when you encounter these challenges and then also thinking about like what funding is there available to support that. So something I'm wondering is when we're thinking about that capital continuum, you know, there was bank loans on one side and then grants on the other side. Have you all tried accessing grants, and what has been that experience?
I haven't found any. I haven't found any right now because with COVID, there was a slew of funding available and it was a much nicer landscape. But now things have dried up.
After the flood, we were able to access a little bit of grant money through the Central Vermont Economic Development Center.
Montpelier Live
And
also.
Montpelier Live, yes.
And now we have an internship grant from Central Vermont Economic Development Committee. So that helps. We're recruiting UVM students to come work with us and learn these things, and hopefully retain talent going forward.
So more limited in terms
Very
of
small.
grant.
Yeah, I mean, we're appreciative, but they're small.
Yeah. And so then thinking about as you're growing for both businesses, what does that actually mean in your ability to scale?
It's a good question. I mean, we deal with this every day now because of everyone knows there's a primary care shortage, right? And certainly mental health. And with the closing of the inpatient unit and the outpatient department at Central Vermont, that's a huge impact on our patient population, right? So right now we're just bootstrapping it. We're working hard. We're still deferring salary in order to scale and grow. We're having to go out of state to bring talent in. We have psychiatrists that are New York based, Florida based, that are able to offer some diversity, and also just in this area, it's very hard to find clinicians and psychiatrists in particular.
And it's difficult to attract employees when we can't afford to offer healthcare benefits to our employees. It's challenging to attract talent without that funding.
For a family through Blue Cross Blue Shield, it would cost us about $40,000 a year to offer a health.
Ironic for a healthcare.
Exactly.
Business.
Yeah.
Well, in my industry for real estate, there's been a significant percentage of realtors in the past few years who have dropped out, especially last year, of doing that work and have gone back into the employment workforce. And we're seeing as well with the housing shortage, there's just not enough houses out there, not enough availability for people to buy and sell. And that also impacts my ability to offer those services, interior design services. So we're constantly pivoting, we're constantly readjusting our strategies so that we can stay in business. And it's just a waiting game for us. It has been a test of our resilience, but we often wonder how long we can do this because if the market continues in this trajectory, then we'll also be forced out of providing these services.
So what do you for each of your businesses, what would be helpful right now?
Actually, I was really taken with the slide, the continuum slide, that you all had that. I thought, oh, that would be useful to have as a resource as a small business owner to look at the different stages. Yes. Where was that a year ago when we were looking? I think someone spoke to this earlier. This first year was really a year that felt very isolating. You don't really know where to go, where to look, and suddenly you're in the throes of a business and you're responsible not only in our case for patient care and patient wellness, but wellness of your employees and also of ourselves and our families. And there isn't an easy place to go, in my experience, there isn't an easy place to go to know where your resources are and how to match up with the resources that you need at a given stage. And then you're thrown curveballs like the Change Health outage, and it's just, you're in crisis mode, trying to put out fires and keep your business doors open. And maybe don't have the time to access the resources, even if you have them right in front of you. So I think part of it for me, from my perspective, would be to have more, maybe a more centralized area or a representative or a mentor or somebody that could have been a point person for us or a point person going forward as we continue to navigate our growth and our scaling.
I'd echo the same. The resource navigation is really difficult. You're trying to juggle, time is finite. You only have enough hours in a day to conduct your business and then strategize and look for funding opportunities to keep your business going. So being able to have more assistance to know what's out there and know what's worth your time pursuing, and then have that extra hand holding, because even though there are resources that are out there, you can tap into something and then you don't get that follow-up or follow through. You get someone to give you some opinions and then they just leave and don't really have that intimate knowledge of your day-to-day struggles and when you're experiencing challenges that might make or break your next steps. So having that point person who just checks back in and helps you stay abreast of what's out there would be really pivotal for us.
So I want to start kind of wrapping up this conversation. Is there any, we're in front of a lot of policymakers right now. Is there any thought that is coming up for you as we're having these conversations, you're listening to each other's stories, hearing these presentations? Is there anything that's coming up for each of you?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So, if I had my wish list, I was very naive in thinking as a small business, our insuring our employees would be a lot more affordable. So that would be one place to start. It's, as you mentioned, being a healthcare, and then, we can offer care internally, but ethically, that's not always the best thing for our employees. And also just navigating healthcare, right? We're out there on our own. We started taking Medicare patients in December of 2023 and did not receive payment until the following summer around June, July. And at that point, everything we had received basically went to cover the salaries of the people who had to work to then go get the money. It's an extremely cumbersome and archaic system, and it's very hard to navigate, and you make one little dot in the wrong place and 30 days automatically puts you back. So, help navigating some of those systems. We had to pay people to do all this. It would be nice if there was resources, especially because healthcare is so limited, to help and support clinicians in the community. that are trying to do this and trying to create these spaces, because we see the writing on the wall, right? We're in a healthcare collapse right now. So we're really trying to build some diversity and something sustainable outside of that model that's not working.
I think for me, I was thinking about this on my drive in from St. Johnsbury today in the snowy roads, and just thinking about community, and thinking about, this technology that we have that we're using here today. We have the ability in Vermont to connect small businesses across service and sector and really leverage space. And Jada and I have been thinking about ways that we could use the physical space that we have to bring in other types of service providers for us more in the healthcare industry, but also connecting outside. Can we connect with libraries as a point of access for healthcare? To do that, we need technology. We need the infrastructure internally to be able to, have the audio and visual technology to make those resources available to people. And I think we could do this across services. I think there's a real opportunity for us as small business owners to get to know one another, to lift each other up, and to collaborate and create community, especially in a state that is so rural and spread out in many ways.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful to be able to connect to other businesses, learn from their mistakes and whatever hurdles that they faced, and to just leverage each other's resources, because there's clearly not enough resources out there. And then on the financial side, since we're deep in our capital stacking mode right now, is to look further or deeper into financial institutions' underwriting processes. They're not very transparent, and there has been a slew of research to show how much more equitable they can be when it comes to looking at a person's credit worthiness, lending worthiness, and the standards they use to see if someone's business is successful. It's not very clear to us if they refer or consult people within our industry to tell them how well our business plan is and how viable our business is. I feel like it's very subjective, and in many instances, it boils down to personal opinion, and it's not a very comfortable place to be in as a business who has gone into the research and taken the risk to present this plan, which has a level of success, only to be told, I don't think you can make it, with no reasons as to why they don't think you can make it. And as well as just finding ways to boost our revolving loan funds that are available in communities. They're much more amenable businesses like us who do not have collateral or securities that they're looking for. And I think that would be really helpful. And also helping financial institutions to be equitable in their way that they market their funds, because a lot of them don't even have language access towards. It's really, if they happen to have someone who speaks a specific language, and also being culturally inclusive, so that we can get more immigrants and new Americans who have statistically a better appetite for business ownership to be able to access the funding that they need to operate their business.
Great. So I'm going to invite Linda up just as to wrap up this part of this presentation, thinking about, do you want to talk about
Sure.
some takeaways that you heard as we were all talking?
Sure. Thank you. So, our goal here today with these segments is really, you heard all of us talk about this on slides, stages and needs and trends. It sounds so sequential and organized, and as if you pass through these stages in a proactive planning with nothing else. But this is where the importance of the reality to the concepts that we're talking about really comes together, because if you think about it, you're starting a business and then you're planning to open and then there's a flood and all of the things that you're in react mode versus being able to go on according to your plan. So we really appreciate the storytelling aspect of the day in the life, wearing all the hats, that it's not a linear path, day to day to day through starting and growing your business. And I think to your point, while we're not having any asks today, it is a real concept when you talk about having somebody that's with you, that isn't sort of just in time information and then on to the next business owner. That is truly a math capacity issue. And I think we all are interested in how many people can we serve one-to-one? How many more people can we serve one-to-many? But that sort of person that stays with you through all of these touch points and decisions, that's tricky. When I look at our organization statewide, we're about 5 to 6 hours per person maximum to get to 530 businesses on an average year that we serve. So, there's lots of math. When I come and talk to you one-on-one in committees, we'll have an opportunity for more dialogue as you do with others. But that is definitely a factor. So we really appreciate you sharing so that there's a real essence of the reality behind the concepts that we're bringing forward.
And I'll just mention for VTPOC, our numbers in terms of technical assistance are much smaller, but we're following businesses through multiple stages of business growth. So sometimes Erin Shaw, who is our community support coordinator, she's spending 60 hours with an individual business on one problem. And then they keep coming back because we are able to hold their hand. But then it gets back to what Linda is talking about. There's so many more businesses that need our support. And we are trying to navigate them to the SBDCs, to Sustainable Jobs Funds, to CWE, CBDC, and also we don't have the time. So,
and our continuation after the break is going to be in another panel of conversation where you'll hear from people who have had many hours over stages of business development, and that will sort of continue the conversation. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
We'll take a 15-minute break and come back at 10:45.
Yes.
Thank you so much.